All right, hello and welcome to Making the Argument. Look, there have been a lot of efforts to assist veterans. There's been a lot of movements. There's been a lot of private sector charities. There's been a lot of public-private partnerships, government sector, VA, and there's been a lot of awareness about things from everything from amputees to PTSD to veteran suicide. But I think one of the most profound things I heard recently on this, from all places, came from a comedian. And this guy's doing a stand-up bit, and he says something, and somebody from the audience asks him if he supports the troops. And he looks at him and he goes, "Do I support the troops?" He goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, I can tell you this much. I think our government has found out it's a lot easier to worship the troops than it is to take care of them." And that hit me. Man, that hit me for two reasons. One, I don't disagree with them. But the second thing I will say is how you take care of the troops matters. Because there's a lot of efforts out there. There's a lot of nice sounding legislation and policies and whatnot. And half the time I find myself looking at it going, do you see me as a veteran or a victim? Because I'm not a victim. And I don't know many veterans that want to be treated that way. So how you address this situation matters. Because it's not something you can simply throw money at and then walk away and think that we've done our job or that we've done right by the people that have served to protect this country. And this brings me to what we're going to talk about today, because I got a friend on, Daniel Gade. He wrote a book called Wounding Warriors. And there's a lot of veterans that can tell you about the things that have happened from inside the Veterans Affairs, inside Veterans Health, all of that. There's not a lot of guys that can not only tell you from that perspective, from being seriously wounded in combat, almost losing his life in combat, having to go through a very, very long and complex recovery process, then continuing to serve in the military, then getting out and actually working on the policy side at the White House, working on the policy side here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So he's seen this from about as many angles as you could hope, and he's as invested in this as anybody I've ever met. So it is my pleasure to have on my friend Daniel Gade.
Thanks, Nick. This is great to be here.
No, okay, brother. First and foremost, I scraped the surface. So give everyone just kind of a quick introduction to who you are and your current position.
Yeah, totally. Well, so I don't have a current position. I'm between things right now. So I most recently spent 2 years as the commissioner of the Department of Veteran Services for Virginia. So I was in charge of anything related to veteran services for Governor Youngkin. But my whole professional life has sort of been oriented, I guess on accident. My professional life post 2005 has been oriented around veteran stuff. But previous to that, so I graduated from high school in '93, but I enlisted in the Army in '92 when I was 17. Went to basic training between junior and senior year of high school. And then when I was a senior in high school, I found out that I'd wasted all that effort because at this point I'd gotten into West Point, and I'm like, oh crap, so I guess I'll go to West Point instead. So I'm one of these weirdos who did basic training one summer and then turned around and did cadet basic training the next summer. So all the same things primarily. And then, so I graduated from West Point in '97 and became an armor officer, and did normal armor officer stuff. Was stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, as a tank and scout platoon leader there. And then when 9/11 happened, it's funny actually, because I was a captain then, and I was a brand new student at Ranger School. So I'd started Ranger School on September 10th. And then September 11th happens, and we all thought it was part of the scenario. We thought, okay, now we're going to go to war. We're going to go in the woods and kill terrorists. And here we were, and everybody went in the woods and killed terrorists.
Yeah.
But what I had going on was I had orders already to go to Korea. So I'm like, oh crap, I missed the war. I'm stuck. I'm going to Korea. So I graduated from Ranger School in November. Went to Korea. Got to Korea in December, and then sort of watched as everybody went to Afghanistan and all that stuff was happening in Afghanistan. And then as the war in Iraq was starting to get sort of on the horizon, if you will. Yeah, I was a tank company commander in Korea, and I'm like, oh crap, because when I got orders to Korea, I was like, hell yeah, this is the hard place.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the world goes to war without us, and here we are now. Korea is the backwater, So then in spring of '04, I was getting ready to change command. I'd been in command for about a year and a half, and I was getting ready to change command. And my battalion commander, my brigade commander came to me. I was in the mess hall, and they sat down. And when you're a company commander, your battalion and brigade commander sit down, that's bad news, you know. And I'm like, hello, sir. What can I do for you? And they're like, and they said, hey, this is not a loyalty test. Pro tip for everybody: if your boss says this is not a loyalty test, it's a loyalty test. So anyway, so he goes, they go, we need to send 2 tank companies with the other brigade on their upcoming deployment to Iraq, and we want you to go. Or the new guy can go, and you can change command. Your soldiers can go without you. And I literally quoted Isaiah, I think 6 verse 1. I said, "Here, my Lord, send me."
Yeah.
And so they did. So summer of 04, we're doing train up, and then August of 04, we get deployed to Iraq. And we didn't just get. So I sort of thought that they would recognize that the Korea training standards weren't what the Fort Hood or Fort Stewart or wherever training standards were, and send us on some kind of mission that was maybe a little less in one of the areas, maybe doing convoy escort or something like that. That's not quite as like intense and urban. But they sent us to Ramadi. And so for those of you who don't know, like Baghdad's a city of like 3 million people. Ramadi was a city of like 300,000. And at the height of the insurgency, Ramadi was producing as many American casualties as Baghdad was.
Yeah.
They were on par, and Baghdad's 10 times bigger. That's how crazy Ramadi was. So we get to Ramadi in August 04. I get wounded the first time in November 04. I was in a firefight at night in my tank, and a rocket-propelled grenade hit my tank and mostly decapitated my loader, killed him instantly. I always like to, I think it's really important to say their names. His name was Dennis Miller. He was from LaSalle, Michigan. He was married, only child of his parents, Dennis and Kathleen Miller. So anyway, so Dennis was killed. I was mildly wounded. I was returned to duty. I was back at work the next day. But I remember as the tank is going back to the base camp, I'm bleeding. Miller is clearly dead. He's sitting on the floor of the tank. He's definitely dead. And I remember seeing his wedding ring in the light and of the tank. And I remember thinking, wow, I know he's dead and his family doesn't know he's dead yet. And he was killed on November 10th, and November 11th, of course, is Veterans Day. And so his family found out from the Army that he'd been killed in action on Veterans Day. So, you know, we just keep doing our work and doing our fighting and doing all the stuff we got to do. And then on January 10th, 05, I was leading a patrol. I was in my Humvee. I was leading a patrol to go out and meet some tribal sheikhs, and I woke up on my back in the ditch. And I remember lifting my head and looking down at my body, and at this point, my soldiers, I'm already on a stretcher because I'd been unconscious for a little bit, and my soldiers pushed me down, pushed my head down. They're like, "Relax, sir, you're the only one." And I remember thinking, like, I'm the only one, what? And I'm like, oh, crap. Like, I got wounded again, you know?
Yeah.
And so when I lifted my head, though, I could see my body armor was all blown open, and I could see my guts, but they weren't working on my guts, they were working on my legs, and so I'm thinking, like, this is not good, you know? And so I said, "Are my legs okay?" And they said, "Sir, you're going to be fine." So here's another pro tip. If they say, "Sir, you're going to be fine," your legs aren't okay at all. But my battalion executive officer was actually on this patrol with me. He happened to be out that day, and so he joined our little convoy. And he was sitting there, he's holding my hand, he's talking to me, and I said, "Hey, sir, I got to ask you something." He's like, "Yeah, anything." And I said, "Sir, you got to be honest with me." He's like, "Yeah, anything." "Are my genitals okay?" And he goes, "I don't know, let me check." And so he goes down, my pants are all blown up, and he goes down to where my stuff is, and he comes back up to my head, and he says, "The happiest thing I've ever heard." He goes, "Yeah, dude, they're dusty, but they look good to me." So I passed out. So in that period, I passed out, and I remember I was sort of in and out of consciousness, very, very painful. And the helicopter came, and it was a Marine Corps helicopter. And I remember this CH-46 settling in over me, and I remember them taking me onto the helicopter. And as I was leaving Iraq for the last time, conscious, I remember thinking, "Oh, thank God, I'm saved." Far from saved at this point. They sent me to a place in between Fallujah and Ramadi called Al-Taqadum, where there was a Navy surgical facility. And when I got there, my blood pressure was 60/0. And they rolled me basically directly into surgery. and and the surgeon who has become a friend describes like looking at this and saying, "Oh my gosh, we might lose this guy." So they do like this 5 or 6 hour surgery, and during the surgery, I ran them out of my kind of blood, and so they had to go to the mess hall, and they're like, "Attention, we need A positive blood." And 25 sailors and Marines who I didn't ever know and never met got up, came to the mess hall, or came to the surgical facility and donated their fresh blood and saved my life. And that's that moment there where those people laid down their life for me has really been kind of a centering moment in all of my, in the 20 years since then. It's been something I think about a lot, because like that's the highest and best of what America can be, where we sacrifice for each other regardless of all the other stuff. Like nobody said, is he gay or straight? I'm straight, married. Nobody said, is he gay or straight? Nobody said, is he black or white? They just knew as an American, they were Americans. They gave their blood for me. And I think that's what we can, get back to as a country, hopefully someday. Obviously not where we are right now. But that started those injuries and that time, and it was very touch and go for a couple of weeks. I got blown up on a Monday, got to Walter Reed on a Thursday. My leg was amputated at the hip. A couple days later, I was unconscious this whole time, so that all of that was lost to me in the fog of whatever drugs they had me on. Was unconscious for about 3 weeks, and then became conscious in early February of 2005. And I remember like, okay, well, what's this going to be like? What is life going to be like? And I was very worried initially because my hands didn't work, and I had a broken neck, and my abdomen was blown open, and I was missing a leg, and like everything was going wrong. And they were pretty sure I was only going to be a wheelchair user forever. And I'm like, well, that's probably not what we're going to do here. I don't think that's what we're going to do here.
I don't concur.
Yeah. I told my wife, I'm like, I'm going to ski. And she's like, okay, good on you, buddy. You're going to ski. Since then, I have actually learned to ski, and I'm okay. So, setting those goals and being part of that was really important to me. But to actually, and kind of leading into what we're going to talk about later with veterans, what I saw was that there were some of us who had this like really powerful motivation to get better. And my wife was great about this, and I want to give her a really quick shout out. Her name is Wendy. She's a total hottie, and she's also she's a warrior, because she came to me very early on, and she said, Daniel, I'm going to take care of everything. I got it. Taxes, I got it. Our kid, we had a 2-year-old at the time, I got it. Like everything, I'm going to take care of everything. But as soon as you can, it's your job to take care of our family, because you're the dad. And I was like, oh, okay. That's the way it's going to be. She's like, you're the dad. You're going to take care of our family. And that was a totally formative moment, because it allowed me to, as a man, to reclaim that identity, and loss of identity when somebody gets a serious disability or whatever, that loss of identity can be crushing. And for me, she helped me center my identity back in the kinds of things it ought to be.
Yeah.
And, and I saw God's miracles throughout this time were just absolutely awesome and amazing. And, I had physicians tell me that I would never move my hands again because of the way the nerve damage was. And they did some testing, and they're like, hey, bad news, dude, you're not going to, I was like, well, we'll just see about that, And so we prayed about it. We prayed a lot, and, slowly over time, the, little things would come back, and then big things would come back. And then, now I'm fine. So it was just one of those things that, like, being centered in Christ, being centered in my family, and my wife helping me be centered in my role allowed me to say, okay, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I made a decision in about probably April. Like in February and March, I was pretty sour on the Army. And by April, I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll stay in for a while. And the way I phrased this to myself to this day was, I'm not going to let the enemy determine when I get out of the Army. I'm going to get out of the Army when I'm good and ready. Yeah. So I'll fast forward through some of the rest of this. I basically was able to convince the Army to keep me. It didn't take much. I'd already been accepted to teach at West Point. And so I said, hey, do you care if can I teach at West Point with one leg? And they're like, yeah, totally. It's no problem. So I went and got my master's degree in public administration and policy at the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. Although not against Alabama last week. That was pathetic. And then at the end of my master's degree was when the Walter Reed scandal happened in summer of 2007. So I get this cold call on my flip phone, and it's the White House, and they're like, "Hey, can you come work?" And I'm like, "I can actually." You know, when the White House calls, you go, typically. So I go and spend a year at the White House doing veterans policy for the Bush administration, and then so I got to see. So I'd had this user.
Well, let me ask you a question real quick.
Yeah.
How did they know to call you?
So when I was in the hospital, I was friends with this guy named Andrew LaRake, who had lost his leg. I don't remember. I think in a motorcycle accident or cancer. It was not combat, but he was an Air Force officer who was one of the pilots on Air Force One as an amputee, which was pretty cool. He was one of the first guys to return to flight status after an amputation. So he and I became friends, and he knew those policy people. And he knew me, and I think he did the connection. But yeah, so I just like, and if you draw the Venn diagram of like people with policy training who also have some skin in the game and who didn't hate President Bush, you got like me, right? Because the other person inside the policy and the seriously wounded but fails the didn't hate President Bush test is Tammy Duckworth, U.S. Senator from Illinois and a friend, but because we were in the hospital together. So anyway, so they called me, so I went and worked at the White House. So I had this like user level wounded warrior experience, right? I know where all of that stuff. I know what the smells are. I know what the feelings are. I know all of it. But then I got to go to the White House, and I got to see like at the very, very highest level, like this is what it looks like. And what it looked like was horrifying to me, because what it looked like as you drill into it was that there are all these groups, and it's a scarcely veiled grab at entitlements that goes throughout the VSO world, throughout the policy world, throughout the halls of Congress. Well, like everybody knows about it.
And just so everyone knows, VSO is Veteran Services
That's
Organization.
Right.
So you're VFW,
Disabled American Veterans, Wounded Warrior Project,
groups.
VFW. Yeah.
So okay, let me ask you about that, because this is something, again, I am not a wounded combat veteran, right. But I remember as we were all out processing, there was this push by the VA rep.
Yeah, 100%.
100%. That's your goal, 100%. Yeah. And what's interesting is when I was getting out, there was a couple guys that were also getting chaptered. And I remember I missed this day, but two of my buddies from my same team were getting out. We were all getting out together. And they're like, "Nick, just be glad you didn't show up that day." I'm like, "Why? What happened?"
Mm-hmm.
Because there is literally two guys getting chaptered out of the military because they can't make tape, which means they can't make weight.
They're fat. Yeah.
They're fat.
Yeah.
And refuse to lose weight, right?
And
again, it's not like it's a high threshold in the military. It's not that damn difficult.
It's not that hard.
And
Put
and
down
these
the
guys
fork
are sitting,
and pick up some weights.
Yeah,
and probably you'll be fine.
And these guys are sitting there nodding their head as this VA rep is like, 100%. Your knee hurts, your back hurts, your hearing hurts. Like, you've got PTSD, and it's like these guys didn't even go to combat. And then my two buddies, who are both Green Berets,
serious
combat veterans, are like, "The hell are you doing, man?"
Yeah.
So is that more of is this just an anecdotal story? Is that more of a problem?
No, it's 100%. It's everybody.
Okay.
It's everybody all the time.
Okay.
We talk about it in this book, Wounding Warriors, available on Amazon.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're going to link it in the comments and everything.
Yeah.
But so, we tell this story again and again. So since 2012, it's been required that anybody getting out of the military goes through the Transition Assistance Program, which is called TAP.
Yeah.
And since 2012, the VA reps get up there and they say, "Okay, listen, you've got to document everything. You've got to claim everything. If you hurt your ankle in basic training, write it down. If you hurt your wrist playing basketball on the weekend, write it down. If you had a traumatic experience in combat, write it down. And then you can get paid for these things." There's actually a chapter in this book called "You Can Get Paid for These Things," describing that, and it's a totally ubiquitous experience. Everybody has it, and every veteran then, or every future veteran, is faced with this really strange situation where their morality alarms, if they're at least a little bit dialed into John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. If they're a little bit dialed into that, then all of a sudden their entitlement alarms are ringing, and they're like, "Wait, I don't think I'm a welfare queen. I don't want to act like a welfare queen." And on this side, the VA person is standing there and saying, "You're dumb if you don't do this. It's free money. Take it. Take the money. Take the money. Take the money." And you're like, okay, what do I do? And you turn to your buddy who's also, who's getting chaptered, and he's getting kicked out of or you turn to that guy and and you're like, what should I do? And about 50% of post 9/11 veterans are filing for disabilities of some kind, versus about 8% of World War II veterans. Now, perhaps your experiences in Iraq or Afghanistan were like D-Day level. Mine, I had some pretty traumatic experiences. They weren't D-Day level experiences.
Yeah.
So like,
Well,
why is it 8% over there and 50% of the? It's a mindset shift that has become ubiquitous throughout the veteran experience, and you can track it through generations of veterans. Vietnam veterans were a little more grabby for entitlements, and are a lot grabby for entitlements now. But the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have been convinced that this is the right thing to do, and many veterans view the disability system as kind of a backdoor retirement system.
Yes,
and
I get told I got asked the other day, well, Nick, what's your disability? I'm like, 0.
Right.
They're like, you went to combat twice. I said, yeah, but I didn't get blown up. I didn't get shot. I didn't lose anything. I mean, they're like, yeah, but so, I said, look, there will come a day where I will probably need hearing aids. And will I go to the VA because I'm sure my military service contributed in some way to degraded hearing at a younger age? Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Here's the deal. And I know you feel the same way because we've talked about this before. I don't begrudge anybody stuff that they are absolutely entitled to in the truest sense of the word.
That's right.
They did something. This was part of their contract. This is part of the deal, right? As we take care of these injuries related to your military service. I don't know anybody that begrudges anybody that, but I will have people sit there and like, well, Nick, I'm whatever. I'm 70%. And I'm looking at guys like, dude, you didn't go to combat. You got no injuries. I got buddies that don't have legs that have less disability than you. How do you justify that in your mind?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And what's funny is what you see actually across the board here. You see this very often. You can find it on Facebook, you can find it on Instagram, you can find it in, chat rooms all over the place, is because people feel guilty. It's almost like, and I don't want to get too much into politics here, it's almost like the shout your abortion people, where you can normalize deviance by convincing other people to be deviant with you. And so there's a lot of encouragement by veterans who are 100% disabled or whatever percent they happen to be, encouraging others to adopt that same mindset, because by doing that, it reduces their guilt in doing what they know is wrong.
Okay, so I know that there's somebody watching. There's going to be people watching this right now that are looking at both of us go, how dare you?
Yeah, totally.
Right, how dare. But here's the important part. Because again, I've known you for a while now,
right? And
I've seen what you've written. The reason why you bring this up and the reason why you think it's so important is not because you don't want veterans to get what's entitled to them. Right. It's because you actually see something very, very dangerous in this mindset. Can you go into a little bit about why you think this is so damaging? I mean, you've hinted at it, but what have you seen?
Yeah, totally. I don't think it's damaging, Nick. I know it's damaging. Yeah. And here's why it's damaging. It's damaging in there's so many ways, but let's just talk about a few of them. The subtitle of the book is called How Bad Policy Makes Veterans Sicker and Poorer. Mm-hmm. There's a program inside the federal government called Individual Unemployability, IU. There are a lot of bad programs in the federal government. There's a lot of money wasted on, drag queen story hour or whatever nonsense they're doing, right? There's some craziness. The worst program in the federal government is the Individual Unemployability Program in the VA. Here's why. If you have a 60% rating for one condition or 70% for 2 or more conditions combined, and you claim to the VA that you can't work, then they will pay you at the 100% rate. Huh. Okay? And they'll mark you as individually unemployable. Now, no cognitive tests are required. No vocational tests are required. No vocational history is required. You're just sort of self-certifying, oh, my disabilities are so severe that I can't work, and they pay you at the 100% rate. Here's what happens, though. The 70% rate is like $1,800 a month. The 100% rate is like $4,000 a month. But if you can't work, you're stuck at $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
You're not going out there and striving. You're not going out there and working. You're not going out there and adding income to your family. And so you're poorer for that. But you're also sicker because now society views you as sick, your family views you as sick, and you, the veteran, begin to adopt the sick role, is how psychiatrists talk about it. It's called performing symptoms or adopting the sick role. You begin to be the person who walks around and says to other veterans, "Hey, you got your disability yet?" And you begin to say, "Oh, every bump and bruise and everything that's ever happened to me is because of the fact that I was in the military one time." And you begin to orient your whole identity around this negative thing.
Yeah.
And for men especially, I talked about what my wife did for me that time by saying, "You're the boss here.
Yeah.
Fix it." That's really powerful. And it's powerful because men get their identity primarily from their work.
Mm.
So last time you were on an airplane, the person next to you said, "What do you do for a living?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? They didn't say, "How many kids do you have?" They didn't say, "Do you love your wife?" They said, "What do you do for work?" To women, most often, people will say, "How are your kids? How many kids do you have?" Things like that. So women often get their identities from their families. Men get their identity almost universally from their work. But remember, the IU program separates veterans from their work and thereby strips them of their identity.
Mm.
So now that you're 25, you're on IU, you go to church or a bar or somebody, you're gonna go meet somebody to hopefully marry someday, and she says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" Because women test your ability to provide by saying, "Hey, how are you providing?" Right?
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm a disabled veteran." Well, guess what? It lowers his chances of getting into a relationship. It lowers the quality of his relationship, and it lowers his self-efficacy. In the middle of all this, we've got a veteran suicide crisis. We all know about the veteran suicide crisis. It's like, the number is, everybody says 22 a day. It's probably the wrong number because it's very hard to measure. But the suicide is a disease of despair.
Mm.
And we're paying veterans to feel worthless and thereby feel despair. And then we act so surprised when they go in the garage and kill themselves. And it's like, you bought that.
Yeah.
You paid for that veteran to be sick. So they're less financially well off. They adopt the sick role. There's something called, oh shoot, the term is escaping my mind. I'll get it later.
Yeah.
But there's something that basically when people are in contact with the medical system, they begin to get more and more symptoms of other things.
Got it.
And so as these veterans are going through this, they're getting sicker and sicker. They're financially less well off. They're psychosocially less well off. And then they sort of lead these lives of quiet despair. And so it's hurting people financially. It's hurting people physically. It's a real problem.
What?
But there's another layer here, which isn't actually in the book Wounding Warriors at all. I think we have a national security crisis driven by this same problem.
Mm.
Because if everybody in society views every veteran as, okay, if you serve in the military, you're going to get blown up or poisoned or raped or, whatever, they're not going to encourage their kids to be in the military. If they see us engaging in nonsense foreign wars without any real national security need on our part, they're not going to want to send their kids into that.
Yeah.
And so we see a recruiting crisis across the military branches, and I think it's driven in part by veterans performing symptoms for cash.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to order Good Ranchers. You're going to go to goodranchers.com. You're going to use promo code Nick, and you're going to get $25 off your first order. Now, why is this important? Well, it's because Good Ranchers has a special deal where if you sign up for a subscription, you're going to get a free add-on. That could be chicken breast. It could be bacon. It could be burgers. It could be salmon. That's right. You get to choose. But you're going to get that free add-on for 4 years. What does that mean? Well, it means no matter how the election goes, you'll have something to look forward to. So even if it goes badly, well, you got a free add-on for 4 years and $25 off your first box when you put in promo code Nick. So go to goodranchers.com, promo code Nick, and then support a great company that is providing a great product and support the show at the same time. Thank you very much. Let me ask you this. And this is where it gets a little bit dicey.
Oh, we're well into dicey already.
How much? Well, let me go ahead and crank my amps go to 11. Right? How much of this do you think is, let's say, ignorant goodwill, which is to say that
Mm-hmm.
somebody says, "Oh yeah, well of course we want to support the veterans," and so yes,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
course.
yeah.
So it's this kind of superficial idea of, well, hey, look, if it's helping the veterans, we're all for it, but nobody's really digging in to actually look at it. How much do you think of that versus how much do you think falls within the realm of what we might call fraud, or this is where it gets really dicey, a deliberate attempt to turn veterans into a victim class?
Wow. I think choice D, all of the above, is what's actually happening.
Okay.
So society doesn't want to say no to veterans,
Mhm.
and there's this, we in the U.S. have this like worshipfulness of veterans, or sort of put them on a tower kind of thing, and I think it's really problematic because I think veterans are just people too. Like, we signed up to do a job.
Mhm.
I wasn't drafted. You weren't drafted. We
Mhm.
volunteered a bunch of times for all this crazy stuff that we used to do, but like, we weren't drafted. So it's just a job you signed up for. I don't know where the worship stuff comes from. I think that's, I get, I know,
and I also,
if I'm offending you, I'm definitely offending all those people.
Well, what it is, it's not even offense. It's that it's here's the other thing I've noticed about veterans. A lot of times, the more you went through, the more you faced, the more you lost, the more you sacrificed, the less you want people to come up and constantly thank you. You want to get, you want to get, you want to get forward, you want to get on with doing it. It's not that it's not appreciated. And I do believe that the one of the distinctions I try to make too is this idea that there is such a thing as what we might call noble professions, in the sense
Yeah, totally.
that there's an inherent danger and sacrifice associated with the job you've chosen to do.
That's right.
But there's also a danger in this idea that if I think it goes back to the World War II veteran, right? Listening to my grandfather talk about joining the Navy at 16,
Yeah.
and fighting in the Pacific, is this idea of, it's like, well, of course that's what you'd do.
Of course.
And there's this big difference between, oh yes, of course I'm a brave hero of the Republic, which must be made way for at all times, versus I'm a member of a club. I'm a member of a group of people that did something honorable. The way I worded it once was, I really don't care what academia, the media, or politicians think of my service. I really care what other veterans think of my service, especially the ones that went before me. And I remember all I want, like, I didn't want to come back, and I didn't expect people to be like, oh, here's jobs, here's a house, here's this, here's the, oh, you served. It's like, a lot of people have served. And I'm proud of my service. I'm certainly proud of the guys that I served with. But what I really wanted was to come back, and when I went to the VFW,
and be a member in good standing of
I
a
wanted
club
to be
of guys who did
in
something
good
hard.
standing.
Yeah,
I remember thinking about this a lot when I was growing up. My grandfather, in his little house in Chico, California, had this little stretch of wall in the hallway, and he had a wood lathe and whatnot. He had probably dropped $10 or $15 in each one of these things he did. But it was these small little picture frames. And from a little boy, I remember there was my great grandfather with his highway patrolman badges and his picture.
Mm-hmm.
There was my grandfather with his fire captain badges and his picture. There was my dad with his LAPD badges and his picture. And I can remember thinking, one day
I'm going to be part of that lineage of heroes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's honor and nobility in that, but I think we need to your point, because we've talked about this before, it's about getting back to that. Don't sell the honor and nobility of what you did for something that cheapens it.
That's right. And I when I'm signing one of these books and giving, I often write, ask not.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want people to remember what JFK was talking about. And JFK, I mean, like, for all of his flaws, which were legion, he was also a legit war hero.
Yeah.
He was a legit war hero, and he knew what sacrifice was. I mean, his brother was killed. His brother was killed in action. Like, I mean, he was those people were self-sacrificial people, and he was saying, "Ask not what your country can do for you." And so I think there's definitely, that's part of it. Civilian society has been trained by veterans to be afraid to criticize veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and when I was working at the White House and doing all this stuff, I know tons of members of Congress. I'm friends with lots of them. Lots of people know that this system that we're talking about is corrupt, and that it's morally bankrupt, and it's bankrupting the country little by little. But they're afraid to say anything because they're afraid of the veterans lobby. They're afraid of the interest groups that are going to come after them. And so they find it politically easier to just give veterans whatever they want.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people of goodwill who didn't ever serve are often like, them paying $50 a month to Wounded Warrior Project or something is like their penance for not having served in uniform. And so there's like a displaced guilt kind of thing happening there. And then and I'm going to veer into the political a tiny bit here and say that the two parties view veterans differently. The fatal flaw of Republicans as they look at veterans is saying, okay, every veteran is a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw this when President Trump pardoned some people who were legit war criminals, convicted by juries of their peers for their actions in combat. And Trump pardoned a bunch of those people, several of them. Because of that idea that anybody who serves is by definition a hero. That's the sort of tick that Republicans have. Democrats have the opposite tick, which is everybody who ever served is a broken toy.
Yeah.
And so we need to throw stuff to them. And this is the part that's a tiny bit more political is the Dems believe that the path to healthcare in the United States should be a single payer system.
Mm-hmm.
And the VA system is as close to a single payer system as they can get. And so they're very leery of allowing veterans to, for instance, for veterans to get care in the community. They're very leery of that because that breaks down their cherished idea of single payer, which is VA healthcare.
Yeah.
So there, all of the things you described are all interplaying, and it's tough.
No, it's interesting too, because I do think it's an area where veterans have I'll put it this way. There are certain areas where I think all of us, I don't like telling people that have never been to war. I would never tell someone that's never been to war, you don't get to have an opinion on this. You never fought. Like, right. Like war
You're a
affects
citizen.
War
affects all of us.
Yeah, exactly. War affects all of us. You should be able to have a say. And ultimately policy should be based off of logic and reason and what actually works based off of, experiential evidence, empirical evidence, logical consistency, like all of those things will play out. If you have the better argument, right, you genuinely have the better argument, then it doesn't matter that you didn't, serve in Iraq.
Right.
By the same token, we all understand that certain experiences give you a different degree of credibility to a broader audience, right? If I'm asking a question about a particular topic for which I am not an expert or I don't have sufficient experience to feel confident in a particular course of action, I look for somebody that does. It's a heuristic that all of us use with respect to our decision-making processes. Do you think veterans have a very unique, not only opportunity, but obligation to reorient this discussion in a way that maybe our credibility or closeness to the topic, affords us?
The only people who can fix this are veterans.
Okay.
The only people who can call out what you can call it camouflage welfare if you like. I like that term. I heard it the other day. And I'm like, I like that term. I'm going to use it. The only people that are going to break the back of the camouflage welfare system that is the VA disability system are veterans who are standing up and saying, well, hang on a second. I'm not a broken toy. I lost a leg. I was this. I was that. I do have some stuff that was related to my military service, but I'm not going to be viewed as a victim class forever. And there's some people who are doing a good job of this. I mean, I think Tim Kennedy does some of this. I think Jocko does some of this. Obviously David Goggins is like, he's kind of a freak. I think, but I think a lot of veterans are standing up and saying, well, hang on a second. That's not right. And that's not the story that you get to tell about our service.
Yeah.
But for every one of those positive examples, there's guys like so many of the people in this book who are, they're going out there and they're saying, well, okay, so this is crazy. And it's bizarre to me that this is true. In 2000, in the year 2000, there were about 600 people receiving VA disability compensation for sleep apnea. Okay. Now the number is 1.3 million people.
Holy crap.
And here's the thing about sleep apnea. It's a 50% disability in the VA if you use a CPAP, one of the positive pressure breathing machines, right? But what causes, there's nothing in military service that causes sleep apnea. You know what causes sleep apnea? Having a thin neck, having a small neck circumference, and being fat. So if you get out of the military and you allow yourself to be 50 pounds overweight, guess what? You're going to get sleep apnea and you're going to need a breathing machine, or you need to get on a treadmill and not be 50 pounds overweight.
Yeah.
But you as the veteran are faced with this moral choice. And like, I always use this. So like, remember when God came to Adam in the garden after Eve had taken the bite of the apple or whatever it was, and said, what's happening here? Well, Adam points at Eve and says it was her fault, right? So the first sin, I guess, is Eve taking the apple, right? The second sin is Adam blame shifting because it was his responsibility to lead that little family, and he didn't, but he blame shifted. So for the veteran who got big and fat, or the veteran who has, something else going on, or the veteran who's a chronic smoker, and then it's like, oh my gosh, my lungs hurt, it's probably the burn pits. Yeah. No, it's not your burn pits, dude. It's your vape. Like, stop, Anyway, so what they're doing is they're blame shifting because otherwise they have to face the fact that, maybe my I'm fat, and that's what's going on here. Or I can blame the government. And if I blame the government, I get paid. If I blame myself, I just got to do the work to get better. Yeah. And that's a real problem because our natural inclination is to point the finger and say, it's the government's fault.
Taking responsibility is difficult.
No, it's hard.
And there are
adult work.
And there's so many things that the government has done wrong that they're an incredibly easy target.
Yeah.
The thing that some of the difficult conversations I've gotten into on this have rooted around this idea that it's usually like, look, dude, I'm not saying you didn't go through some stuff, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't get the benefits that you are rightfully entitled to. What I am saying is that you can't exploit that, and there's a cost to doing so. Like this idea that, well, I'm just, hey, I'm just getting a little bit extra from it. No, dude, there's anytime you are taking something that you deep down know you don't really deserve,
right? There's
a cost to that.
100%.
There's a cost to that.
That's right.
And it's one of the reasons why, again, somebody that doesn't understand the dynamic, and again, I know Wendy as well, your wife. Somebody that doesn't understand the dynamic might look at it like, well, is that kind of harsh for her to, at the moment that her husband's recovering, like,
it's the best thing she could
dude,
have done.
like,
it's the best thing she could have done.
Because like I know that the greatest compliment, like one of the greatest compliments my wife has ever gave me is one day she just stopped me and she said, I need you to know that you do a good job providing for this family and you make me feel safe. I'm like, oh, dude, I could go, you don't got to say another nice thing to me for a year. I could go on that. And
I'll mow the lawn with a scissor if you just keep telling me that I'm valuable. Yeah.
Well, and it's that whole idea of that when men get identity, like through our work, I think another way to say that, especially and I think it's another reason why it is such a good thing when a man does get married and has kids, is that work is what we use to protect and provide for our family in many respects. And so having that purpose and meaning is absolutely critical. I remember somebody talking about this. They're saying one of the biggest things that they found for men in general and especially for combat veterans was when they were dealing with like genuine PTSD, or they were dealing with genuine issues about leaving the military and not really fitting into civilian world or whatnot. They said one of the biggest problems they had is that they were all therapy was kind of geared toward women. And it was this idea of, hey, you're great and you're wonderful and we're all going to come around and we'll all support you and, the whole deal. And it didn't work. And then they watched veterans interact. And veterans interact is like, hey, dude, have you considered stop being such a little about this?
Yeah, they're busting each other's balls all the time. Yeah.
But that same guy would literally die for you.
That's right.
But he's also going to be like, hey, have you considered getting off of your ass?
That's right.
And it was funny because I was talking to Randy Couture, right? Famous UFC champion, Hall of Famer, the whole deal. He does a lot through his gym, Extreme Couture in Vegas, for veterans. He's a former veteran. And he was really emphasizing that peer-to-peer. He goes, there's something about guys coming here to this gym, doing jiu-jitsu, rolling around, doing MMA, and then sitting around and talking about stuff with other men who, one, will listen to them. Because there are times where guys just got to be like, and a lot of times it's talking about what's happened to your buddy, right? A lot of times it's about what's happened to your buddy. He goes, because guys still need that, but they need it within a realm, and they need it within an environment where they're surrounded by other men they respect as men.
Those are all positive identities.
Yes.
Those are all positive identities. And I think that, we're all in a milieu at all times where we have like 6 or 7 important identities to us. And the identity that you allow to come to the fore in each circumstance is a little bit different, but you ought to be thinking about which ones of these are positive identities and which ones are negative. So for example, your husband identity comes to the fore when you're taking care of your wife. Or when you're being intimate with her or whatever. And those are positive. That's your husband identity coming forward. And then when you're in Richmond, you're delegate Freitas. And then when you're, and all of those can be positive identities, but the ones that people adopt that are negative identities, they need to try to shed those if they can. And for me, when people, ask me what my disability rating is, it just makes me want to vomit. Because that's a negative identity, right? All of that is tied to something that happened, close to 20 years ago. And, there's no night when I wake up in the night to go to the bathroom or whatever, and I'm like, oh, yay, I got to grab my crutches. And like, I'm not like proud of that. I'm proud of my service, but my disability rating is that's a dumb thing to be proud of. But the reason people talk about it, I'm pretty convinced that this is true. Because you don't hear, like you're a special forces veteran. Like, what do you have to prove, right? You don't hear often people with very serious combat exposure talking about their VA disability rating.
Yeah.
You do hear a lot of veterans talking about it, and they use that 100% rating, if they have a 100% rating, as a proxy or as a measure for how virtuous their service was. Not valorous, but virtuous. And so they're saying, if I'm 100%, then that means I was doing hard things. And if I did hard things for the country, that means I'm virtuous.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're measuring virtue all wrong.
Yeah.
Virtue is not cheating on your wife.
Yeah.
Virtue is, not beating your children.
Yeah.
Virtue is working hard, even at a job you don't like, to make your community better. Like, that's virtue.
Yeah.
Virtue isn't telling the VA you can't hear out of your left ear and, stop.
That's really interesting because I know, like, when people ask me about military service, like, I feel guilty about it. And people go, what do you mean you feel guilty? What'd you do? Like, no, it's not that. I feel guilty because I only did 2 combat tours.
Yeah.
I feel guilty because other guys got into far worse scraps than I ever did. I feel guilty because I still feel like, gosh, did I really test myself in the way that I needed to? Did I really do what I could in these situations? What if I had been over here? What if I'd done this differently? Like, I still go over in my mind operations from 2008 where it's like, I should have done this, or I should have done that.
And zagged.
Yeah. And that's the part where, and I always try to, I don't know. I just, it's weird. Like, that's the part I kind of struggle with sometimes on my military service, is this idea that I really didn't do enough. Or people probably think because I was a Green Beret, I did more than I did, or I was in more danger than I really felt like I was, or whatever it was. Especially when you're talking to somebody that,
Right.
And so it's interesting. The other thing too that I've noticed is that for a while there, I noticed starting to get comfortable with this idea when people would say, "Oh, you were a Green Beret, you were Ranger qualified, you sniper, like it's you went to combat. I'm not going to mess with you." And I remember thinking, dude, am I just resting on my laurels
That's
now? Right. Am I just? I can tell you right now, when I finally hit a point where it's like, I once was that guy, and I'm not right now. And if I want to recapture any vestige of being that, well, then I want capabilities, not stories.
That's
right.
That's
like,
good. That's good. I like that.
I want capabilities, not story. And that really pushed me to be like, all right, nope, get back into the gym, get back into doing these other things, start doing hard challenges again, look for new goals, look for new meaning, look for new purpose. Like what are the things that you can continue to develop? I am so much happier with that mindset than I ever was with playing with this idea that, oh yeah, I did those things and therefore you should respect me now.
Mm-hmm.
And let's do this. I want to kind of transition in arguably the most important part of this, and some would say the most complicated part of this, right? Because like I said, there's going to be a lot of people listening to this. Like, you guys just dumped on veterans the whole time. There is nothing that could be further from the truth. Because again, when you see people that you care about, and when you see people that you respect, even going down this path, in part because the natural incentive is to go down that path. The answer is not trashing veteran. The answer is no. We need to fix this, because one of the things that attracts so many people to the military is this sense of honor and nobility and purpose and meaning in your occupation.
That's right.
And I don't see any system that doesn't recognize the value of those things actually leading to healing people or helping them. So what do we need to start? How do we need to reorient the way we look at this? What are some of the major changes that need to be made to actually go from a system that in many cases is certainly helping some veterans, but in other cases is hurting a lot more and creating an incredibly destructive mindset?
So the first and most important thing we need to do, I think, is we need to break the link between veteran health care and veteran disability. So it's a policy thing, and it's got a tiny bit of nuance, so I'll try to unpack it just really quick. So right now, in order to qualify for VA healthcare, you need to be within a couple of years of getting out of the military, or you need to have a disability rating. And so a whole lot of veterans are going to the VA for they apply for disability so that they can go and get healthcare.
Got it.
And I think we as a country should make a decision. Okay, hey, if you served these number of years, here's the healthcare you get. If you serve these number of years, you use the healthcare. If you get hurt doing these years, here's the healthcare you get, and just completely break that link between, so they don't have to go through the disability door to get to the healthcare door, because we do need to take care of their health, but paying them disability benefits while we do it is the wrong way to do it.
I like that idea.
Okay, so that's just a policy thing that we can do. Number two, and this is super important and it's very hard to do, is we ought to be serious about what's disabilities and what are conditions. So stop calling things disabilities that are conditions. If you have hearing loss and you're 50, guess what? It's a condition. It's not a disability. You're not disabled because you have to get hearing aids. Stop pretending like you're disabled if you have to get hearing aids. If your back hurts when you're 60, it's not because you were in the Army when you were 20. It's because you're 60. And we live in a world with gravity, and it's a fallen world with sin and poor design and all of this stuff. And that's why your back hurts. It's not a disability. It's a condition. So then once we go through the VA schedule for rating disabilities called the VASR-D, it'd be pretty simple to go through there and say, okay, that's a combat condition. That's a disability. That's a condition. That's a disability. And you just call balls and strikes. And then I think we should probably stop paying disability things for things that are conditions. If it's a condition of life, or if it's a condition of aging, or if it's a condition of genetics, or if it's a condition of your behavior causing it, like, we'll treat it on the healthcare side, but there's no reason we should pay for it on the disability side.
Got it.
Which would allow us then to turn our attention to what ought we to be paying for on the disability side. Once we define those things, then we can go after paying people appropriately for what that is. So, I have a hip level amputation. So I don't feel particularly guilty about the fact that the VA pays me disability compensation for that.
No.
Right. I do sometimes, because it actually hasn't affected my ability to earn money for my family.
Yeah.
But it has, it does affect me in a lot of ways. And so is that a big deal that they pay me for that? I don't think it's that
no,
big a
and
deal.
when it's very clearly combat related.
It's sort of combat related.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty obviously combat related. But getting those definitions right, I think is really important. But then overarching all of that, there's kind of a timing thing here too, where the VA has, or the military has something called benefits delivery at discharge. It's actually a VA program where people can apply for their disability benefits before they ever leave military service. And the idea is that they stop getting paid by the Army on June 1st and they start getting paid by the VA for whatever they've got going on July 1st. So there's no gap in payments. All of that's fine. Whatever. That's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But the problem is that the VA is assigning permanent disability ratings to people before they have completed a course of rehabilitation. So there's no effort to get people back to their maximum capacity, their maximum capability before they're assigning disability levels. So there's no charts or anything, so I'll just try to do it with my hands here. If you didn't enter military service, maybe your life trajectory is like this. And if you did enter military service and you got scuffed up a bit, maybe your life trajectory is like this. And so our policy purpose should be to close the gap between where we are and where we would have been.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Well, I think you do it through education. You do it through training. You do it through inspiration. And you can even do some really fun things for policy geeks like us. These are fun things, but doing things like incentivizing the behaviors you want and not the behaviors you don't want. So when people go in for their VA appointment and their body mass is within healthy ranges, because have you seen America? But within healthy ranges, cool. Let's pay that person. Let's give them a portion of the money that we're not spending on their health care because they didn't get fat, right? Instead of paying the guy who did get fat and has the CPAP, why don't we pay the guy who didn't get fat and is keeping his, and that will inspire some other people. So I think that's that kind of thing. There's some room for some really cool using policy tools, using human behavior to get these people back on the right track. But rehabilitation, redefinition of disability to things that are disabling, and then veterans need to stand up. And I know probably a disproportionate number of the people who watch your content are veterans. We need to stand up and say, look, stop telling that story about me. That's not true.
Yeah.
Because my service did not break me.
Yeah.
My service hurt me, but my service didn't break me. And service doesn't break people. So we need to stop allowing people to stick that label. You wouldn't allow somebody to put a Harris sticker on your car, right? So you're not going to allow people to. You shouldn't allow people to put the broken veteran label on your life just because you're a veteran. I think it's the wrong way to go. And so what can we do as veterans? We ought to be providing for our family. We ought to be gaining education to do the career that we want to do. We ought to be grinding every day, and then let the rest of those chips fall.
Let me ask you this. This is something I've kind of bounced around in my head for a while, but I remember somebody talking about like veterans benefits and why aren't we doing more for X, Y, and Z? And I kind of shocked somebody once when I said, look, I'm proud of my service. I think as a society, we should honor, military service. But this isn't a blank check for the rest of my life where now anytime I want something, I can say I served in the military. Right? I don't want that because it infantilizes veterans.
That's right.
Now, or where now I'm just a ward of the state.
That's right.
That's not what I want.
That's right.
And I'll usually point to like there's three benefits, regardless of your military service or what you do. Every veteran, and I'm pretty sure this is true, every veteran gets at least three benefits that they leave with. One is their Montgomery GI, so money for college. One is your VA home loan, so you can get a zero down, home loan. And the other is your VA benefits generally associated with medical and things like that.
Right.
Here's what I've noticed. I liked my Montgomery GI benefits because I received a benefit, which was a certain number of money. I did some of the other stuff, so I ended up with $80,000 for college.
Perfect.
And I went out into the marketplace and everybody competed over my $80,000 that I had to spend. My VA home loan, right? I went out and banks that accepted it competed over being able to, because I'm going to pay interest on that home loan, right? They competed over me as a potential lendee. VA medical has the worst reputation of those three benefits by far, in part because I'm not a customer here. I am a burden on an overtaxed,
That's right.
overregulated
That's right.
system.
That's right.
In the other two, I'm a customer. I have something of value to take into the marketplace that I earned that people compete over. Why can't we do something similar on the medical side where I don't need the government to set up a bunch of hospitals? I don't need the government to set up a bunch of programs.
Because the government sucks at setting up hospitals. You know what's good at setting up hospitals? The invisible hand of the economy.
Yeah. It's like I would much rather have a medical benefit that I'm taking. And like you said, that medical benefit is, my military service did not warrant the same medical benefits that your military service did. And I'm fine with that. I'm not looking to get as much as I possibly can out of Uncle Sam. I'm looking to get what I would need for stuff that's service related
to close
and makes
the gap
sense.
between where you could have been and where you are.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to drive, 50 miles to a VA hospital where the doctors are going to change out far more rapidly than they will in my local hospital.
That's right.
So if you told me, hey Nick, here's your benefit. This is the benefit you are entitled to as a result of your military service and the things that happened during your military service.
Like a health savings account.
Yes.
Here you go.
Good luck.
You
can take it anywhere.
Yeah.
And I want the hospital competing over me. I want the doctor to be like, oh, yes. I want to be treated like a customer. I don't want to be treated like a broken toy. I don't want to be treated like a burden on an overtaxed government-run system. Why do you think there is such a pushback on providing that benefit just like we do the other style benefits?
Because there's a massive bureaucracy invested in keeping the system the way it is. And so the VA is the second largest federal government agency. It has about 300,000 employees. About 270,000 of them, 250,000-ish of them are in the healthcare realm, right? They're for everything from janitors to hospital administrators, right? They're on the healthcare side. So there's a huge number of federal employees who are vested in that. There's the idea that veterans are the idea that veterans are different and special is something that veterans have been saying for a long time, but is not true. So with a few very minor exceptions, a veteran's health conditions are the same as everybody else's. So my hip level amputation is the same as some guy who got hit by a truck, and we need the same kind of physical rehabilitation. And if we're going to a premier prosthetics clinic, then it's a premier prosthetic clinic. A veteran's amputation is not different than anybody else's amputation. It's just an amputation, and it requires certain care. And then you do the care, and you're off to the races. The minor exceptions might be in like combat related post traumatic stress. Specific stuff that's related to combat might require that kind of specific stuff. Everything else is stuff that's common to humanity and ought to be. Your local hospital can deal with most of the conditions that you might have. But veterans tell the story that they're special, at least in part because some people really like going and being, oh, I'm going to the VA medical center and my stuff is free. And there's sort of this idea that like it just feels good, it feels comfortable, and so people are kind of tied into it. There's also, though, the political ramifications. I mean, the political left really likes the idea of single payer health, and the VA is one of those. But then there's a bureaucracy around the veteran service organizations too, because they get their legitimacy by ensuring that the VA is always problematic, kind of, so they are not interested necessarily in doing what's best for the veteran. Like any organization, they do what's best for the organization. And what's good for the organization is the symbiotic relationship that they have with Big VA.
Got it. Well, look, this is, I'm really glad we had this conversation because I know we've talked about some things that are going to be highly controversial, but I've been feeling it for a long time. And it's been frustrating because it's almost like, oh, you can't say that. Whatever you say, don't say that.
Yeah.
And again, a part of me is felt guilty. It's like, well, my service wasn't anywhere near as hard as some other guy's service and whatnot. And so, maybe I just don't get it. And I'll do I'll do what I think is the right thing for me, but maybe this isn't maybe. And it just shows kind of how that mindset is infiltrated. And I appreciate what you had to say about bureaucracy too, because I remember, again, one of my favorite favorite contemporary thinkers is Thomas Sowell.
Mm-hmm.
And, people now think of Thomas Sowell as a very, very pro free market, economist and social thinker. And it's like, yeah, he used to be a Marxist. And people are like, you're kidding. Like, oh yeah, no, read his story. He used to be a Marxist, trained under Milton Friedman, still a Marxist.
Right.
What caused him to question all of that? One summer working for a federal bureaucracy.
Oh, interesting.
And what he said in that, he goes, what I learned from that is he goes, ostensibly bureaucracies exist in order to serve a legitimate function, which ultimately is supposed to serve the people. In reality, bureaucracies have their own interests, which may be completely different or even counter, productive to what their stated purpose is.
100% right.
And
100% right.
And again, it's not to say that everybody within that particular bureaucracy is evil or bad or out for themselves. It's just to say that there's an incentive structure that exists there. And if you're not willing to recognize it, you're going to continue to throw money into something and not get the sort of results you're looking for and just be convinced that, oh, well, we just have the right people in charge. When in reality, it's like, no, you have a perverse incentive structure.
That's right. That's right. And it doesn't matter whether a Republican is in the White House or not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
What matters is that there's an incentive structure. There's a system that's built to be self-perpetuating, and it's maiming people. It's hurting people. It's hurting real people. And I think, like the VA spends more money. This is a little factoid you can take. The VA spends far more money on disability benefits than it does on healthcare.
Wow.
So think about this. We're paying more to keep people disabled than we are to get them better.
Yeah.
That's insanity to me. That's the wrong approach. You take a bunch of that money from the disability side, you put it on the healthcare and rehabilitation side, and all of a sudden you have healthier veterans who are not, hurting themselves. And you said something earlier. I want to circle back to it. You're talking about how you served for reasons that are personal, and some of them are public, some of them are private, but that you don't view your service as a sort of a future entitlement to whatever you can grab from the government. That's kind of how you said it, right? So in 1956, if you're going to read two things about this concept, I would say read Wounding Warriors, available on Amazon, and I would also say the 1956 Bradley Report. So President Eisenhower put his friend Omar Bradley in charge of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about the growth of the VA system? This is in 1956, and the 1956 Bradley Report is phenomenal because he calls it. He nails that commission nailed all of these problems, and they said they under-nailed it. Actually, they said by the year 2000 that veterans benefits could be up to like $6 billion, and which is hysterical.
Yeah.
When you adjust it for inflation, that's about $60 billion, and so that's about half of what it was in 2000. Now it's like $300 billion, $350 billion. It's a huge amount of money. But one of the things he says in there, I think it ought to be a tattoo that every veteran has to get or something like that. But he said military service is an obligation of citizenship and does not in and of itself constitute a future a basis for future entitlement.
Ooh.
It's so good. It's so good because what he's saying is, remember, this is Greatest Generation. This is the guys who just did all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
This is him saying, this is what our country required.
Yeah.
You're in our country. There's a social contract. We'll take care of you if you're maimed.
Yeah.
But don't think that because you did this because you had to.
Uh-huh.
You did this because it was your duty to do it. And you shouldn't be using that as a club against your fellow citizens forever. And I think way too many veterans, 250,000 new veterans a year go on the disability system, and they're using their military service to some degree. Some of them, of course, I'm going to be accused of I hate veterans or whatever. Some of them are going to be accused. Some of them are credibly accused of using that system as a club on their fellow citizens, using it as a grab for entitlements. And I think those people are gross. I think it's morally bankrupt.
Well, I got to tell you, for those of you watching, again, if you got any questions about this, pick up Wounded Warriors, right? If you want to fight back, if you think Daniel doesn't know what he's talking about, despite the fact that he lost a leg in combat, the second time he was wounded in combat, has spent almost the last 20 years intensely looking at these issues and how to improve it. This is true. I mean, how many other areas within society right now can we all say that what is lacking is a healthy dose of tough love for something? If you really care about people, you tell them the truth. You don't just tell them what you think will sound good or what's politically palatable or what's politically correct. You say what you think is true. And I can tell you this, for every veteran I've served with, for every guy I served with that really had some difficult issues coming back, none of them were made better by just getting another paycheck by the government. None of them were made better by being told that they were just owed things. All of them improved the moment they found meaning and purpose in their lives again. The moment they found camaraderie with like-minded people, the moment they felt like they were serving a higher and noble purpose. And you have to start asking yourself, why is it that there is such a push, not just with veterans, but with all of society right now, to call things stunning and brave, which are neither stunning nor require no courage, or to constantly tell people that they're a victim? The Victim Olympics is on full scale, and Daniel didn't say this, I will. I do believe that there's a concerted effort with certain elements within society to look at the veteran community, because that veteran community is typically one that is made up by people who believe in honor and nobility and meritocracy. They believe in fighting for something bigger than themselves. And I think there has been a concerted effort culturally to undermine our country, in part by looking at veterans and say, no, you're none of those things. You're just broken, but it's okay. We'll take care of you. Think about how pernicious that is, to take this vestige of people that civilizations have depended upon throughout society, throughout history, to be the ones that would stand up and do the difficult, dangerous, and deadly things in order to protect society, and convince them, nope, you're just broken. You're just broken. I think what Daniel's doing is incredibly important. I think the book's incredibly important. And I think as veterans and as combat veterans, more of us need to start standing up and saying, look, we want every single one of our buddies, every single one of our friends that got hurt to be taken care of. But we want to do it in an honorable way. And the thing I want to maintain, again, I can't emphasize this enough, the thing that I always wanted from my military service was not to be thanked every time someone hears that I was in the military. I appreciate when people say it. It sure as hell wasn't to be called a hero, because I don't think I did anything heroic. I think I did my job. And the point is that once upon a time, doing your job as a soldier, as a Marine, as a sailor, as an airman, whatever it was, doing your job was honorable enough. The guys that did something heroic deserve to be recognized for that heroism, apart from cheapening the word by applying it to everybody that happened to wear a uniform. And so it's time for us to stand up and say, no, I'm not broken. I served the republic that I love, that I care about. I served the Constitution that I care about. I did it because I loved what I was fighting for. And I'm not going to cheapen that by being turned into something else in exchange for a paycheck. I think that is a far healthier way to actually help veterans dealing with really serious issues, whether it be trauma, whether it be physical, whatever it is. I think it's a far more nobler way to actually do it that will actually see far better results than the current system that we have. And I think it's about time that we start being a little bit more skeptical of some of the people that say they're trying to help us, when in reality, they seem to be trying to get us more dependent on a government system, right? I don't know about you. I didn't fight because of any particular government. I fought because of ideas that were enshrined within the Declaration of Independence, within the Constitution. That's why I fought. That's what motivated me to join in the first place. I loved the ideas behind it. And I want to continue to fight for those ideas. And I'm not going to let anybody stand in the way of doing that. Daniel's clearly not letting anybody stand in the way of doing that. He's speaking hard truths, not from a position of hatred, not from a position of dismissing real issues or real problems, but because he's seen it from the inside. He has worked through it. He has suffered through a lot of it. And he wants to be able to genuinely take care of people. And genuinely take care of veterans doesn't mean that they're part of a benefits program for the rest of their life. What it really means is that they once again find meaning, purpose, and can continue on with a noble mission after their military service is done. So Daniel, thank you very much for being on. Again, go check out the book, Brilliant. Wounding Warriors. We'll also put a link to this into the description so you can go find it. Daniel, thanks again, man. God bless you, your family. Yeah. And we'll definitely be in touch.
Thanks. This was great. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you all. We'll see you next episode.